From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Today's topic is something that I've given quite a lot of thought to. In fact, in my little notebook that I jot down thoughts or things that I want to reflect on or things that I want to capture, I jot I jotted down. It's been over a year ago, and kind of with a question mark to what the growth process actually looks like. What's the cycle of personal and professional growth? And I think that it's probably subjective a little bit to some degree, but then when I really dug into it and thought about it and kind of had it just marinating in my brain the past several months, I think the principle that is wrapped up in the growth process isn't subjective. I think growth is subjective because growth, personal growth and professional growth is going to be different for every single one of us, but the actual principles and the process of growth have got to be pretty much principles, just like gravity, right? Gravity always applies. The principle behind the growth process always applies. And so, as I got to thinking about that and really put those thoughts down on paper, I wanted to kind of drill down into what it looks like because we hear a lot about the value of growth, right? We all know we want to grow. I mean, that's why you're listening to a podcast. You want to grow either personally or professionally, maybe both. And that's a good thing, right? Great for each one of us to have thoughts of life can be better, either personally in our relationships or our health or our outcomes personally or professionally in our career, in our satisfaction, in our significance of work worth doing. Because it doesn't matter how each of us define success. We all will define it differently to some degree, but really, I think pretty much universally, the definition of real true success is not based on material things, right? It's great relationships that are supporting, loving, and kind. It's work worth doing that satisfies and fulfills you. It's knowing that you've made a difference, right? That's the definition of success. It's not really about how big the house was or how nice the car was or did you have a new coach purse, right? It really comes down to um the things you can't touch, the intangible things in life are a huge part or all of our definition of success for every one of us. So, we talk a lot about the value of growth, but what does it look like? I mean, if you had asked me even 10 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, yes, growth is a great thing." And I could show you some examples of how I had been intentional with growth, but I couldn't have broken it down or articulated it into terms of this is the growth cycle, the growth process. This is how I can, duplicate this. We can look back over our lives sometimes and see times of growth. I can see much easier times of growth that I was intentional about growing myself in competency. I think most of us have a really great idea how to grow our competency, our knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? The things that we know how to do. You can study, you can read a book, you can watch a YouTube video, you can go to college, you can get a certification. Lots and lots of ways that we know we can be intentional about growing our competency. That's not the question. When I'm talking about this on today's podcast episode, I'm really talking about character growth, growth of who I am as a person. Now, certainly I can look back and see there were times of growth, and let me tell you, they were not fun for the most part. Um, in fact, most of the times when I can say I've grown the most is times of adversity, times of stress, times of challenge. And I think that's pretty normal. I think those are the times that offer us the most opportunity for growth. Growth is not automatic, it won't just happen. But certainly, those times of adversity, challenge, and obstacles in our life offer opportunity for growth if we're able to apply the principle if we're able to grow through those times instead of simply going through those times. So, what does it look like? We all know it's valuable, but how can we be intentional about the growth process? So, a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, I've talked about this a lot, but probably perhaps not in quite this way. Number one, in the growth process, we have to be proactive, right? And that comes down to who we are as a person, what we value. Between stimulus and response, we all have the freedom to choose our response, as Covey puts it. And he calls that being proactive. It's writing the script based on our choices. Well, number one, you have to value something different. You have to value growth if you're going to be intentional about growth. You have to value it. You have to value with not settling for status quo in your life. Because if you don't value it, you're not going to be intentional about applying the process for growth, right? If you're completely happy with every single dimension of your life, number one, I completely applaud you. But if that was the case, I don't think you'd be listening to this podcast. So you have to value growth, and you have to be valuing it at a deep level. Not just interested in growth or not just interested in different outcomes. You have to be committed to it, right? You have to value it enough to do it. And if I can't see that evidence in you, then I would challenge that you don't really value it. It's much like exercise. You probably ask anybody out there, do you value being healthy and keeping your heart beating? And of course, everybody's going to say, yes, I value my heart beating. But do you value it enough to actually go exercise enough to help keep your heart healthy? Right? That's a different level of commitment. The first person who says, oh, I value keeping my heart healthy, but they never exercise for whatever number of excuses, and we all can create excuses, but someone who just says, yes, I'm interested in that, I would like my heart to stay healthy, that's interest. But someone who's actually exercising and doing something about it, that's commitment. So when I say being proactive and valuing growth, you have to be valuing it at a level of commitment that says, I'm going to be intentional about the growth process. And you have to be proactive in terms of responding versus reacting, because life is going to hand you challenges, and it's all too easy to react in the heat of the moment instead of responding based on what's going to serve you better. And I've talked over and over again on different podcast episodes about what that can look like. So won't dig into that too much. But number one, I think that's critical for the growth process. We've got to be proactive. And that's going to be the foundation for the second step, or the second part of the cycle, is being responsible, right? Taking ownership of your growth, taking ownership of your outcomes, and saying, if it's going to happen, it's going to be me. That's really just another level of being proactive, right? And saying, I am responsible. I am taking ownership of this. And I've talked before about the limiting mindsets that hold us back. Number one, the victim mindset. The victim mindset will always hold you back, believing where you are is someone or someone else's fault. Now, absolutely, there are circumstances in your life that have been beyond your control. There are circumstances in your day that are beyond your control. But you've got to take ownership and stop blaming everyone and everything else for not getting what you want in life. And it's that internal locus of control, which is kind of a fancy way of saying, inside deep down, it's up to you, right? It's up to you. You are the one responsible for your life. No one else has as much input or influence in your life as you do. So if you're not happy with it, you've got to do something to change it. So avoid the victim mindset. The next mindset to avoid is the stagnant mindset. That's believing someone else will do it for you. I can remember the first job I had working as a waitress at Pizza Hut, and you know, getting that first paycheck was a wake up call for me. Because it doesn't matter how many, if you worked 40 hours in a week, if you're only getting $2.13 an hour on your paycheck, because that's the way waiting tables worked, is is you'd get paid $2.13, and theoretically the rest would be made up in tips. So, however many hours you worked, they'd pay you the $2.13, and theoretically, you made enough tips to make the difference between that and minimum wage. And then they would tax whatever your paycheck came out to be. Let's say you worked 10 hours at $2.13 an hour. So you had something like $22 paycheck, and then they would tax from that. They would deduct the taxes that you theoretically made. Well, let me just tell you, even if you worked 40 hours at $2.13 an hour, plus the tips that you took home, but even if you worked all week full time, that is not a big paycheck. And then on top of that, they take the taxes out, right? So I remember getting that first paycheck. In fact, I have it. I've kept it all of these years because it was just such a wake up call in realizing this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. This is not where I want to stay. There's nothing wrong with waiting tables, but it was not my version of a dream come true. And getting that first paycheck was a reality check and saying, hey, I'm also not doing what I want, but I'm also not going to make any money at doing it. But I had that realization that nobody else was going to come do it for me. If I'm sitting there waiting on the job of my dreams to come find me at Pizza Hut, it never would happen. If I wanted life to be different, I had to do something different. And then last but not least, the last mindset that can really hold you back is the entitlement mindset, believing that someone else owes it to you. Let me tell you, nobody else owes it to us. Nobody else owes it to us in life to fulfill our dreams or help us be successful. There again, we have to be responsible and avoid those three mindsets. So we have to internalize that in this second phase of the growth cycle. And not just be responsible for avoiding those mindsets, although those are key, but also consider how you're responsible for what thoughts you're thinking. Like, what do you think? What do you think about? And who or what is influencing your thoughts? Who or what is influencing your thinking? Because your thoughts are determining those feelings that you have. And the feelings are influencing your choices and your behavior is influencing your outcomes. So you've got to be responsible for where are the thoughts? What are the thoughts? What's influencing my thoughts? And this could play out in so many dimensions, in all dimensions of life, relative to relationships. Who influences the thoughts that you have about your relationships? I remember quite a few years ago, I was running with a small group. It's been quite a few years ago, several years ago, and I just remember having that moment of several people in the group spent most of the run, every run, complaining about their significant other. Now, we all know people who would tell you that they love their significant other, but then they go to work and complain about them, right? They don't like them. There's a difference between love and like. And I just remember that moment where I'm like, you know what? These people, all they do is complain about their spouse. And realizing that I didn't want that to influence me. But the funny thing is someone picked up on it pretty quick. They're like, "Well, Rhea, you never complain about your spouse." And I'm like, "Well, number one, any of us might find something that we might want to complain about, but r- if we are 100% honest with ourselves, we realize that most of the time we all have room for growth. And so it doesn't serve us well in any relationship to spend all our time focusing on the flaws of the other person instead of thinking, well, where could I take responsibility and grow? Much like that famous example in one of my in my favorite book that talks about the log in your own eye, and you can't see the log in your own eye, but you want to remove the speck from your neighbor's eye, right? So be responsible, and then thinking about that and who or what is influencing your thinking. And maybe you need to make some changes in the things around you. Because here's what influences your thinking. People. People around you influence your thinking. And if they're influencing your thinking in a negative way, it's time to change some of those relationships. Not because you're better than anybody, but because you are going a different direction in your life. Other people influence your thinking. Their energy, other people's energy. There are some people that just wake up with a negative point of view every day. And that's perfectly okay if it's serving them, but I want people around me who have positive energy, who are going to look at this and say, "What am I grateful for?" I was driving home from work, not from work. That was kind of a I don't know where that came from. I was driving home from running um, this past week, one day this past week, and ran over this piece of metal. I guess I don't know. Somehow this giant piece of metal got stuck in my tire, and my tire blew out. Really, just I was almost completely stopped at a red light, getting ready to turn. It was a green light, and I was waiting to yield, and it my tire just blew out. I heard it explode, and pretty quick, as soon as I pulled through the red light or the green light, I felt the car start to wobble and my tire pressure went to 0, and I was like, "Oh, that was my tire." So I pulled over, and sure enough, giant piece of metal sticking out of my tire, completely trashed the tire, and obviously I was not going to be able to drive home or anywhere else. And so I called Mac, and he was kind enough to come get me and help me figure things out. But I had pulled over. Fortunately, right when I realized the tire blew out and I pulled over, I pulled into the parking lot of a tire store. I have not making this up. You could not have planned anywhere better in the world to have your tire blow out than right there in front of the parking lot of a tire store. And they were very kind to get us fixed up with a, t- uh, a tire that would help us get the car to the shop to get the tire was under warranty, so we were able to get it replaced. But anyway, I tell you that story. I share that with you because there are so many people that I'm sharing this with later. I'm like, oh, I ran over this piece of metal and my tire blew out. And it's funny because you can tell the negative mindset people with the positive mindset people, because the negative people, their first thought is, well, that's terribly unlucky. And absolutely, it's not anybody's idea of a great morning to run over this piece of metal and blow out your tire. But positive impression, if your first thought is, wow, that kind of stinks, but isn't it fortunate or blessed or lucky that you were right in front of the tire shop? I mean, I could think of lots worse places for the tire to blow out. I wasn't driving down the interstate. I wasn't in the middle of a big city or 200 miles from home. I mean, I was right there. I was a quarter mile from home and right in the parking lot of the local tire store. Anyway, I share that with you to say, when things happen, there are always two ways to look at them. But people and their energy are influencing the thoughts that you're thinking. So if you want to start changing your thought patterns, then start looking at the people and their energy around you. Environment. Environment influences your thinking. If you have a nice, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, I live in my house too, and there are always things that could be picked up or shined or furniture polished or dusted. But for the most part, my environment is pretty well kept. I mean, things are mostly organized, not perfect, but pretty much every morning, first thing I want to do is just pick up and tidy up and put things where they belong, and make sure that the dishes aren't piling up, getting out of hand, that kind of thing. Because just kind of having a cluttered environment can help you feel yucky. Maybe that's not the way for everybody, but whatever your preferred environment is, look around and say, is this environment helping me think my best? What you read or watch, there's no doubt, I've talked about it before. What you read, watch, or listen to is influencing how you think and your health. I don't think we talk about that a lot, but your eating and sleeping and exercising habits, or if you're in pain, that can influence your thinking as well. So being responsible for what can I control relative to that? What can I control relative to what's influencing me? Because a lot of times we can tie back our behaviors to starting with our thoughts and what's influencing us. And then last but certainly not least, being intentional. So we've got be proactive, be responsible, and be intentional. And when I say be intentional about the habits and choices you're making. Just like you've got to take responsibility for the things that are influencing your emotions, You've also got to be intentional and responsible for the choices, habits that are either helping you move forward or not. And guys, it's not about being perfect. We all know of things that we should do and we're not 100% at, or we know things that we shouldn't do, right? All you're looking for is 1% better today. 1% better. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to get everything right. Just the majority, right? Just the majority. I'm just looking for 1% better today than I was yesterday. I just want 1% better habits or choices today. And don't pick every dimension of life. Pick just one. Maybe you want to just be intentional about one dimension of your life coming up in October. If you just spent October, 31 days of October, being making 1% better choices every single day in October, and that would compound over time, you realize you could be in an entirely different place, mentally or physically or literally, if you just were intentional about 1% better every single day of just 1 month. You could be in a completely different place. Okay, so there you go. That's kind of a high level overview of what I'm thinking relative to the growth process. So, what does that look like? You boil all of that down to your growth process is going to come down to your personal or professional growth plan. What does that look like? Here's the thing. You should read something every day that's going to help you move forward. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a whole book. It doesn't have to be a whole chapter. It could be one little blog. It could be one paragraph or a couple of great quotes. But you have to be intentional. Now, if reading's not your thing, there again, find an audiobook or another podcast or something. But you've got to read something, learn something every day that's going to move you forward. You've got to reflect on something. You've got to think about something every day that's going to move you forward. And you've got to apply, right? You've got to practice that. You've got to actually put that change, that mindset shift into application. Just thinking about it's not going to help you move forward. You actually have to do something with it. So thinking about that could be boiled down as the simplest personal or professional growth plan. But like anything in life, the simple things are the ones that have power, right? Because they work. You don't need a fancy journal, a fancy calendar system. You don't need to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for the greatest life coach. Those things might help you. I'm not saying they can't help you. I'm just saying if you really get intentional about applying a personal or professional growth plan and those three things I've shared with you, you absolutely can change just about anything personally or professionally in your circumstances. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. I've talked over and over again about process. We have to be patient enough to work the process until we get results. And I might do another podcast on that. It's been a while since I talked about the power of process, but it's so relevant because we can leverage that power of process to be more successful. So we have to be interested, we have to be committed, and then we can be proactive, responsible, and intentional. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.